You boys be quiet down there!
Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon saw a digital release a few days ago. Can it hold a candle to the classic Castlevania series? Does it bring any new ideas to the table? Can it make us excited for Ritual of the Night? The three of us have all played it, and we're going to tell you what we think.
Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, the long-awaited crowdfunded project from Castlevania producer Koji Igarashi, is scheduled for release later in 2018. But in the meantime, this 8-bit inspired side project has suddenly been released to fulfill a stretch goal before the main game comes out.
The design of Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is based on a simple premise. What if in 2018 we made an 8-bit style game in the spirit of Castlevania 3?
The game was developed by Inti Creates, who were originally going to develop the main Bloodstained game but left that project. Inti Creates made Curse of the Moon without involvement from the main game's staff, except for story oversight from Koji Igarashi, and of course it is based on the same character designs and musical compositions as Ritual of the Night. The look and sound will be quite familiar to anyone who has played Blaster Master Zero or Mighty Gunvolt Burst, which Inti Creates released in 2017.
Right away when starting the game, it wows you with lush backgrounds. Whoa, no way the NES would have made this many parallax layers in the background. The backgrounds don't continue with quite this much activity throughout the whole game, of course, but they are consistently nice to look at.
The parallax scrolling can be a little disorienting, but they didn't overuse it in sections with tight jumps.
You would never see bosses this size with a background on NES either. Come to think of it, the NES was never widescreen. The lack of colors in the character sprites is also a nice nod to the NES. You play as Zangetsu, who is at first the least interesting of the four main characters. He's basically Dr. Social from Master of Darkness. He swings a katana instead of a whip.
There are 3 other characters Zangetsu can recruit at the end of each of the first 3 stages. You may also choose to kill these characters instead, which will give Zangetsu new abilities. These new moves, seemingly inspired by Vice Project Doom and Super Ghouls and Ghosts, make him a lot more interesting.
Miriam, who will be the main character in Ritual of the Night, has a comically long whip. Gebel is a lot like Alucard from Castlevania, but his upward attack is very versatile, and when he turns into a bat, it feels really good to dash attack through enemies. Is this guy going to walk like that the whole time? Alfred is the weakest in many ways, but his magic can devastate tough enemies if you have the right spell at the right time. All 4 characters are useful throughout the levels. Deciding when to use each character is a big part of the strategy in Curse of the Moon.
The music also screams Castlevania 3. The instruments used sound more or less similar to Famicom audio, with the expanded 3 sound channels from the VRC-6 chip included in the Japanese version of Castlevania 3. It's perhaps not an exact match, but the sound still reminds me more of the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 than any other 8-bit game. The tunes are quite good and provide a creepy atmosphere similar to the 8-bit Castlevania games. It ought to be good. The music was mostly composed by veteran Castlevania music composer Michiru Yamane.
It's great to hear 8-bit renditions of Bloodstained tunes that you'll recognize if you've been following news about Ritual of the Night. To me, the instrumentation sounds more like a mix of sounds from Game Boy and Sunsoft NES games than the Castlevania series, but at times it reminds me of Konami's later NES games like Ninja Turtles 3 and Contra Force.
Some of the sound effects remind me of the later 3 Mega Man games on the NES.
The gameplay is very similar to Castlevania 3. but it's obvious the developers actively searched for ways they could make a perfect game even more perfect.
There are subtle updates to make the game more user-friendly, but it still feels like a classic 8-bit game. When you attack enemies, the hit detection feels more forgiving, and there are some enemies that look like you need to duck to hit them, but you can take them out while standing. You can't change the trajectory of a jump, but you can turn around to do a back attack. You can also jump onto stairs like Rondo of Blood, but you can't jump off.
Doesn't it suck in Castlevania 3 when you add a new party member and you have to say goodbye to your current one? Curse of the Moon says that's stupid. Why not have all the characters available at once?
And didn't you just love how in Castlevania 3 it takes about 5 seconds to switch characters? No? Neither did I. In Curse of the Moon it only takes a brief instant.
And when you were a kid playing Castlevania 3, did you ever wonder why when Trevor dies, his partner dies too? Actually, I wondered about that in a lot of games. Well, in Curse of the Moon, only the character you are currently playing dies.
If one of the characters bites the dust, you start at the beginning of the same screen with your remaining team, which makes difficult jumping sections much more manageable. In order to actually lose a life, each of the characters in your party has to die, one by one.
I fell in the pit. You fell in the pit. We all fell in the pit, yeah. I fell in the pit. You fell in the pit.
This makes your first playthrough on the default difficulty mode pretty easy. On top of that, the game grants you plenty of 1-ups. You can get them by earning enough points or by collecting 1-up icons. And some of the more difficult parts near the end of the game even have infinite 1-up loops, so you'll have plenty of chances to fail and try again. If you're an experienced player of 2D platform games, you're definitely going to want to select Veteran Style for your first playthrough. There's a Casual Style where you aren't knocked back when you're hit.
Well, why don't I drink out of a toilet bowl?
Also, be sure to enable Command Subweapon in the options, so you can use special weapons by pressing up and attack.
In my opinion, that option is not necessary. You can just use a separate button for the sub-weapon. Unlike in Castlevania 3 and Rondo of Blood, there aren't any branching paths that unlock alternate levels. The branching paths in Curse of the Moon are more detours you have to take if you don't have the requisite character.
At first, I didn't understand the point of the alternate paths, since most of them make the game longer and more difficult without giving you any worthwhile reward. But then I realized that in order to unlock the game's third mode, you have to get through without your allies. And suddenly I found myself using all of those detours which had seemed pointless before.
The game progression is certainly different from Mighty Gunvolt Burst and Blaster Master Zero, even though the games look alike. I think Mighty Gunvolt Burst gave you more reasons to compulsively replay levels for hidden items and high scores, but this game respects your time more and doesn't encourage compulsive behaviors too much. That is, at least until you start going for obscure trophies for things like completing the game with one ally but not all of them. Like many other Inti Creates games, the bosses have desperation moves, which might be frustrating if they cause you to lose the fight, but it's very satisfying to dodge them, especially if you manage to do it on your first try. You can forget about Master of Darkness, Rusty, 8 Eyes, or Ninja Gaiden. This is the most blatant Castlevania clone on the market. There are several enemies that are so similar to the enemies from the Castlevania series that this feels like a parody at times. While the feel is very true to the Castlevania formula, the setting, characters, and bosses feel as fresh as a new entry into the series, and not just a remake. What more could you want? Everything here is great. I think there is almost nothing to criticize. For Switch and 3DS players, it would have been nice to have in-game achievements like in Mega Man 9 and 10, Mighty No. 9, and Mighty Gunvolt Burst. But that critique should be directed at Nintendo more than the developers of this game.
Overall, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is a very nice treat for Castlevania fans, brought to you by one of the most capable 2D developers currently working. If you love Castlevania 3 and would like to see a modern take on it, then all three of us are recommending Bloodstained Curse of the Moon.